We're going to take a look at the next type of factoring that we're going to learn. It's called factoring trinomials using what's called the AC method. But basically we're going to talk about how to factor trinomials that fit a certain pattern. And before we look into factoring, we just want to quickly review what happens when you multiply binomials like this. You have this first x plus 3 times x plus 4. And whatever method you use, whether it's the box method, FOIL, distributive property, hopefully at this point you feel comfortable getting the x squared plus 4x plus 3x plus 12. We know when we combine like terms here, we get x squared plus 7x plus 12. And the key here is that the 3x and the 4x, or the 4x and the 3x, whichever way you think about it, come together to make the 7x. Now the issue we're going to have when we factor is that we want to actually go backwards, right? We want to figure out how to take this 7x and split it up into 4x and 3x. Now there's lots of ways to split 7x up. We could think of 7 as 1 plus 6, or 2 plus 5, or even 10 plus negative 3. But the key is that we also have to get this 12, right? That 12 is going to come from multiplying the 3 and the 4. That's what gave us this 12 right here. So what's going to happen, and we'll take a look at this, working this one backwards and then some other examples until you get the hang of it. When we're trying to factor, we're going to have to use these two numbers here, the 12 and the 7, to figure out how to get these two numbers here, the 3 and the 4. Okay, so let's pretend we don't already know the answer here, right? We're going to have to figure out what two numbers are going to add to 7 and also at the same time multiply to 12. Okay, so let's think about what numbers would multiply to 12 and at the same time add to 7. Okay, now the key here is, even though there's lots of ways to add to 7, we only have a few ways we can multiply to 12. Now sometimes the number jumps out at you, and that's great, but we also have to know what to do when the number doesn't jump out at us. So when we're thinking about the ways to multiply to 12, we want to think about all the ways to multiply to 12 using whole numbers. So there's 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. Okay? And if we're sort of systematic about this, trying the 1, then the 2, then the 3, we can make sure we get all of them. Now, there's only these 3 real factorizations of 12. These are really the only 3 ways to multiply to 12 using whole numbers. The question is, which one of those add to 7? Well, 1 and 12 doesn't add to 7. 2 and 6 doesn't add to 7, but 3 and 4 does. So we put the 3 and the 4 in here, we put the 3 and 4 in here, they both work, and that tells us that we can actually just write our answer as x plus 3 and x plus 4. Okay? Now for now, this is all we need to do. There is some actual work we can do to fill in these steps, but one thing that we'll notice is that as long as this first term is just x squared, which really means there's a 1x squared, we can take these two numbers that we find and put them straight in the parentheses. Okay? If you move on into another course, you might see numbers where, or problems where this 1x squared or the x squared term may not actually just have a 1 in it, and then we're going to have to use a long technique. But for now, to get the hang of it, we're going to take the original trinomial, 3 terms, right? Fill in the blanks, and then come back and fill in the parentheses. Okay? So we're going to try a few of these together, and then it's going to be important that you just do some repetition and try them on your own. Once we throw in signs, plus and minus signs mixed together, it'll get a little bit more challenging. But this is the basic process, and this is one of those basic skills that carries forward into the next couple sections here and also into future courses. Okay, so here's our next example. In this one, I haven't given you the answer. Right? We're going to identify the plus 8 and the plus 12 here and set up our two numbers that multiply to 12 and two numbers that add to 8. Okay? Now we did just write out the factors of 12s, but I'll put them here again. I have a little trouble with my pen. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Okay, 1 plus 12 doesn't equal 8. 2 plus 6 does equal 8. So we'll put the 2 and the 6 in. We'll put the 2 and the 6 in. And we should be able to write our answer, x plus 2 and x plus 6. Okay? Now, you don't have to check your answer if you did it right, but this is an old skill that you can every once in a while check just to kind of see it happen. X times x is x squared. 6 times x is 6x. 2 times x is 2x. 6 times 2 is 12. Put these together. X squared plus 8x plus 12. Check. Okay? So the key is first identifying the numbers plus 8 and plus 12, putting them in the right blanks over here, and then filling in the blanks. You got to find a pair of numbers that works in both cases. Okay, let's try a couple more. Now we have some minus signs involved, right? We have to now find two numbers that add to -5 and multiply to -14. I like to do the multiply first, just because that's the one again that has less options. Okay. Now we need to add to -5 and multiply to -14. We're going to write out the factors of 14. 1 times 14 and 2 times 7. Okay. Now the key is, and this is one thing that we'll have to note, if you're going to multiply to a negative number, what does that mean about those two numbers? You can't have two positives or two negatives. You have to have one positive and one negative. And what happens if you add a positive and a negative together? Well, then they're going to actually subtract. So the important thing to think about here is not that you're adding to 14. Now you're to -5, sorry. Right? Now we're going to actually subtract to -5. So 1 and 14 don't subtract to -5, but 7 and 2 do. So we're going to start off with the 2 and the 7, right? How are we going to get a -5? Right? Well, in order for the 5 to be negative, the bigger sign has to be negative. If we put a 2 and a -7 up here, right, does it still work? Yes. So 2 plus -7 equals -5. 2 times -7 equals -14, which means we can write our answer as x plus 2 and then x minus 7. Okay. Now, if you happen to come up with this -7 in the first blank and the +2 in the second blank, these are exactly the same thing. Right? The order of the parentheses doesn't matter. You're still going to get the same thing. You could have